There's one key issue that really explains everything going wrong with Disney Star Wars. Now, I know that's a big claim, but I have proof. So, when it comes to the original 6 movies, each one kind of felt like its own genre. You know, you had the classic hero's journey, you had romance, you had mystery, all of that. But even though they each had their own identity, they all felt like one piece of a whole. They all felt like they led into each other. So, when we get into Disney Star Wars, that falls apart. Now, it's easy enough to just say, like, oh, Disney is not very good with Star Wars, they can't do it without George Lucas. Sorry if you hear running in the background, that's my dogs and cats. So it's just like, what went wrong? And it would be easy enough to just blame them and say, they just, aren't any good, but there's a pattern here, and why did it happen? So for Disney Star Wars, we have a lot of movies and shows that just don't feel quite right. And honestly, the more stuff they make, the longer it goes, the more it seems like things just become less and less Star Wars. You had Rogue One, I believe was the first one, and I remember when I saw stuff for that, like promotional materials, and then finally the movie, I was like, what the heck is going on? They made a World War II movie, but they tried to make it Star Wars. Because when you look at the imagery of the design of the explosions, design of some of the costumes, a little bit of the plot, and then what's the other thing? Gosh, I can't remember. Oh, palm trees. Storming a beach with palm trees. That was one of the things that I was like, why are there palm trees in Star Wars? Why are they pairing palm trees with the Death Star? Like, when I think Death Star, I don't think palm trees at all. So it felt very odd, and it immediately pulled me out of the movie, and immediately just pulled me, all of my suspension of disbelief and stuff just gone out the window, because I was like, why are there palm trees? And it just felt so disconnected. But there was still some stuff there that felt like it could be Star Wars. So I was like, okay, a little off, but whatever, it's fine. Then you get Star Wars, Solo, A Star Wars Story. I don't know what happened there. You get the sequel trilogy, where the first one tried to remake A New Hope. The Rian Johnson one did a World War II movie again, even more so than Rogue One, and then I don't even know what to say for Rise of Skywalker. All I can say for that one, actually, is that it is a better comedy than it is anything else. Like, it's not a good comedy, but it's better watching it as a comedy than as anything else. So, these movies all felt very out of place. For the first one, why were we repeating A New Hope? But more importantly, why did we essentially reset the world to what it was at the beginning of the previous trilogy? That doesn't make any sense at all. There was a reason why for the prequel trilogy and then the sequel trilogy, or not sequel, sorry, original trilogy, the state of the world and the power dynamics were different. It wouldn't have made sense to try and do the exact same thing over and over and over. It would have gotten very boring, very redundant, and would have felt like, okay, this is a world that just never learns. Nothing can ever change here. So why would we bother exploring any more stories? When it comes to the shows, things have gotten even crazier. For Boba Fett, there was so much there that was good in terms of the potential. I absolutely love that dynamic between Boba and the Tusken Raiders. That, I think, was a great point, something that should have been explored, probably chronologically though, so that way we could have seen him build up this relationship, finally have a family that's just like him, and then have him lose it to the Pikes. And now all of a sudden, Boba has a reason to want to be a crime lord on Tatooine. Meow, my cat's meowing. So, why in the world then did they try and scrub his reputation clean and his image clean and make him this nice hero and stuff, when clearly he should have been the anti-hero? Like, why was he actually fighting the Pikes and stuff? He just kind of got sucked into a problem, and it's because they couldn't make him, morally ambiguous. They made him a punching bag. And so, of course, a lot of fans didn't like that, because that didn't feel like it fit with the character. That didn't even make sense for the character. It didn't make sense for the world. It didn't make sense at all. Obi-Wan, same thing. I know a lot of people were like, oh, it makes sense that he had his powers nerfed, but, why in the world would he purposefully disconnect from the Force knowing he was going to try and train Luke? It doesn't make sense. What would have made sense is he can't use the same powers as before, because if he does, while the Inquisitors are closing in, if he exposes himself before he's done his training to be able to come back in the Force to help Luke, everything is lost. So he can't out himself as a Jedi. He would have had to use different powers. Usually what people pick up on more is, oh, they had it be instead of Luke, it was Leia. And yeah, that doesn't make any sense either. But really, the whole story should have been the Inquisitors are closing in, Obi-Wan can't use his traditional powers, so he has to try to find another way to fight and get them to leave and go away from Luke. My cat is walking around on my computer, so I hope he doesn't close this out on me. And you just have him doing the training from Qui-Gon, so you get that whole, cathartic, him learning how to process and let go of Anakin and losing everything and have a new hope. So the story was already there, and they just didn't do it. And the Acolyte was the Acolyte. Yeah. Trying to take everything that Star Wars was, and it tried to turn it on its head, and that didn't really work out. Also, I want to add, why in the world did Disney throw in an Easter egg of Ki-Adi-Mundi, and then have it be, fans calling out, oh, he shouldn't have been alive here, and the only 2 speaking lines I think he has in the movies completely contradict him having any knowledge of this stuff, because otherwise those lines don't make sense. And then they were like, oh, it's just fans being picky, they don't even really know this guy's name, they didn't know it before because they just want something to hate. And then Disney, simultaneously with the show, released a $300 deluxe lightsaber set for Ki-Adi-Mundi. I'm like, you are not selling $300 fancy lightsaber sets to fans who don't know his name. I knew who he was before, and even then, $300, that's insane. But who's gonna spend that if they don't know who he is? Why would you put an Easter egg of him if you didn't think anyone would know who he is? No, you know the fans were gonna know who he was. You're not selling us $300 lightsabers for nothing. That's just a quick side tangent there. So oddly enough, as bad as Acolyte was, I think one of the best examples for why Disney Star Wars has been failing and how this one key factor is causing all of these issues, it's actually best shown maybe in Skeleton Crew. Now, I know a lot of people have been enjoying the show, and in all honesty, yeah, it's pretty cute, but it's E.T. and, the Goonies in space. It's not a Star Wars story. And I remember when I saw the trailer, I was like, okay, this is really weird that it feels like someone wanted to make E.T., but they were like, oh, but E.T. and Star Wars would be cool together. And then I've been watching it, and then I was like, yeah, no, they actually really just did that. Treasure Planet, E.T., Goonies, and I'm finding direct correlations to all of these, and I'm like, what the heck? And I remember after watching the very first episode, I was like, okay, I completely understand who made this. And I don't actually know the name of whoever did this, so I don't know the person who came up with the concept, however many writers or developers or whatever. But the person who made Skeleton Crew is a person who thought when they watched the original trilogy as a kid and were playing with their action figures, Luke Skywalker and Vader, it would be so cool if I got swept up on a spaceship and taken to this galaxy far, far away to have my own Jedi adventure. And that's what they put in Star Wars. Except it doesn't really work within the world of Star Wars. It seems very weird and awkward that, oh, this dad here has these classic 70s glasses and everything's mid-century modern, and they have, cars working on rails instead of anything hovering and stuff, because it's why would they have backwards technology from what they had before? That doesn't make sense. And so it feels so weird. I get it's supposed to be, oh, it's an isolated planet. Why would they know about Luke Skywalker then? Why would they know any of that? How did they know about the Empire? How did they not question that they weren't a part of the Empire? Unless I missed that and that was explained, I don't know. But it just seemed like, okay, I want to make a story imagining my younger self being swept up in this galaxy. So I'll make that story, and I'll set it in Star Wars, so that way I can get Lucasfilm to sign off. And in all honesty, I wish they had done a non-canon story, a little movie or short series or whatever, of a kid doing just that, getting swept up. A kid from our world in the 80s being swept up after seeing the original trilogy complete, and, that could have been nice, but the important thing here is this really doesn't fit with Star Wars. Now, I'm going to take a little moment to go back. Here, we're going to do a backflash here. So, when the Ahsoka series had come out, I was thinking, okay, something seems very off here. And there's a pattern, and I don't know what that pattern is. And I was watching a video of someone trying to explain why do people hate Disney Star Wars. And they gave some good options and stuff, but I was like, okay, but why is this happening? What is going on? Why do so many of these things not quite feel right? Like, it didn't feel right to repeat a story like it did for, Force Awakens and A New Hope. But it doesn't feel right to go completely off the deep end and do something completely different. Like, yeah, people who defend The Last Jedi are right in that not every single Star Wars movie is exactly the same and the exact same genre and stuff like that. So it made sense for it to be different. But then it was too different, so why? Where's that balance? And what's causing this issue to happen? And so in this video, they were showing a lot of clips of Dave Filoni specifically speaking about Ahsoka and making it, the writing, and his thought process behind all of this. And he said something very interesting. So all of a sudden, something was telling me, like, okay, you need to look at the directors / writers. Who is doing what? What are they saying? Why did they make the choices they made? And so I looked on Disney Plus and I saw they had a, behind the scenes making of Obi-Wan thing. And the director I was watching, and she said something that all of a sudden it clicked for me. I was like, this is the key issue. She said, it's so exciting to be passed the torch and get to make my Star Wars story. It's not your Star Wars story. For every creator who has been making anything Star Wars, it's not your Star Wars story. It's just Star Wars. There is the Star Wars story, and that's it. So, of course, it feels weird to have one story where it's a kid getting swept up in this whole wonderful world of the galaxy after they've, been living in this 70s, 80s world, and they're really just like, it's from E.T., but it's not. And of course, there's, one story where the Jedi are secretly evil and timelines are alternate and characters are, acting in all sorts of weird ways that they shouldn't, and the Sith are somehow rewriting their history and whatnot, and it's always Star Wars, but it's not. Andor was thought by many people to be very good, but a lot of people that I saw defending it back when it wasn't so popular said, it's good, it doesn't feel like Star Wars. Obi-Wan was the story out there. It was not really good for the people who were writing it and creating it and all of this to say, hey, I want Princess Leia in there, because that didn't make any sense. Yeah, it made sense from a story perspective that we needed to, have Obi-Wan knocked down a peg in order to make it interesting, but it did not make any sense to have Obi-Wan give up his connection to the Force, especially considering in the first episode, he said he was going to need it later on to achieve his only life goal that he had left. It doesn't make sense for Boba to suddenly be this, benevolent leader, just super kind, nice guy who just only gets, thrown into the fights and whatnot. No, he should have been very active. It should have been a revenge quest. Like, honestly, with the Tusken Raiders, they had it right there. I do kind of wonder, was there a version of the script where he found family with them and then was doing all this stuff on Tatooine to be able to gather up an army to get revenge on the Pikes? I kind of wonder if that was the original script. So why make Boba squeaky clean? It's not because that's the Star Wars story. It's because that was their Star Wars story. Why do anything with, Thrawn and bringing him back and having that be like, it should be this big, monumental thing, and yet somehow, bringing in the witches, even though George Lucas specifically took out the witches so you wouldn't have the magic conflicting with the other magic system of the Force, and they were supposed to be completely gone. Why bring them back? Because that's what one person wanted to do. Now, I know that I only said Dave Filoni said this, and then Deborah Chow, I believe, is the director for Obi-Wan. I could have gotten that wrong. I'm not really good with names. But the thing is, every single director / writer I have seen anything for when talking about their Star Wars stuff, their Disney Star Wars stuff, they all said some variation of the same thing. It was, what story did J.J. Abrams want to tell now that he got to start a new trilogy? It was not what actually makes sense for the world. Why was Luke not in there? Well, he said in so many different interviews he was nervous about writing for Luke. Well, guess what? You didn't have to do that. You could have said, hey, I just don't feel like I can handle that, so we need to bring in someone else. Like, you could have had help, man. You could have. It was the right thing for the story to have Luke there. And then why was he, in the Last Jedi, just like, oh, let me toss away my lightsaber, let me give up on all my friends and family and all that? Why did he do that, even though it was completely contradictory to his character? Because Rian Johnson thought that would be cool. Why didn't he have that whole opening sequence? Because he thought it would be cool. Not because those ships actually make sense, it's just he thought it was fun. The whole setup, the whole plot, is just because he thought that was the way he wanted to do things. That's not the story. The Force Awakens is the biggest issue in terms of the movies, though, of course, because it set up things in very much just the wrong way. Like, I know a lot of times people want to say, like, oh, art is so subjective, and it's like, there are elements where it is, but there are definitely times where it's very objective. And to have 3 trilogies going over different time periods in the galaxy, and to have one that's the last one starting basically at the beginning of the previous one, that doesn't make sense. That is objectively a bad move. It did not make any sense. Like, where did the First Order come from? They came from nowhere. They came from J.J. Abrams just wanting there to be an empire. So why was that there? Just because somebody wanted it to be there, not because it was the story. So many people were wanting to see, how had Luke been rebuilding the Jedi, because that was the next logical step. It was not logical to take things back to the beginning of the original trilogy. It was not logical to do whatever happened in any of the other 3 movies. Nothing about any of those made any sense. The Acolyte doesn't make any sense because, well, guess what? That was just what Leslie Headland wanted to do. It wasn't because that actually made sense. It wasn't because she was working within the constraints of the world, within the story that had already been built. It's because she wanted it. Why was Plagueis in there? She wanted it. Did it matter that he was like 15? No. The motivation behind making every single one of these projects and every single little decision that was in each of them that contributed to them feeling not like Star Wars, it was all made and motivated by just, I want to do this. A lot of people complain that J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson just seem like kids fighting over action figures in the sandbox and stuff during recess, and yeah, that's because that's about as much thought as any of these creators have put into it. Now, I don't mean to be that mean or rude with this, but it's really, really, really annoying because they fumbled it so consistently. And yes, Lucasfilm, everyone who's been signing off on these projects, everyone who's been contributing, has just fumbled. Why would you keep on making things that are not the Star Wars story? That is almost the entirety of Lucasfilm. Okay, they have a film catalog outside of Star Wars, but aside from Indiana Jones, there's not much else. Like, I appreciate American Graffiti and other things like that, don't get me wrong, and there are a lot of other good Lucasfilm movies, but you think Lucasfilm, you think Star Wars. Let's be honest. Indiana Jones is usually the second thing. After that, most people can't name a third. So when this is almost the entirety of what your studio is for, why would you not give a little bit more care? At the end of the day, when you are writing for a pre-established franchise, you don't have freedom. Okay? Like, if you want the freedom to create your own world, your own characters, to mess with the dynamics and this and that, you have to create your own world. You have to do everything from scratch. That's what George Lucas did. But after that story was established, everything afterwards needed to follow the story that was already set. Especially when you're doing stuff that goes back in time. Yeah, you can't say, oh, I want to set something during this time where this story is going on, and I'm just gonna mess with it, Like, let me just bring in, like, this whole other, like, Empire starting or ending thing here, or Jedi ending thing, or whatever, and just the stuff that should alter everything, and let me just not do that, And we'll say, for Boba Fett, at the very least, it wasn't a galaxy-defining thing, so their mess up there, it was minor enough, I guess. But it really just baffles me that none of the creators took the time to stop and say, I know I'm excited about this, I know I want to create Star Wars, but I just can't have this freedom to write literally anything I want exactly how I want. At the end of the day, that's the responsibility you have as a creator and a writer when you're working within a franchise. And they didn't. They haven't. Nobody at the studio stopped that from happening in any single one of these projects. When I was watching Skeleton Crew, I was kind of invested in it as the story of that kid from Earth in the 80s who just finished watching the original trilogy getting swept up in an adventure, so much so that in this latest episode, which I think is like episode 7 or something, when one of the pirates got into a ship and put on the usual pilot's uniform, I all of a sudden felt so thrown off. So I was like, oh my gosh, I completely forgot this was supposed to be Star Wars. Like, it threw me for a loop. I did a double take when looking at the screen. I was like, wait, did we switch? Did we switch to a different show? What happened? I was like, no, this isn't a different show. This is Skeleton Crew. Skeleton Crew is supposed to be part of the Star Wars story, but it's just someone's Star Wars story. I know a lot of people have said that a lot of these Star Wars projects have felt like fan fiction, and yeah, that's true. Like, aside from Leslie Headland being like, oh yeah, I actually put some fan fiction in here, no. Every single itty-bitty one of these projects has just been fan fiction. It's just been, I want to tell a story, but I want a platform where they get attention, where I get money for it, so I'll do it in Star Wars. I love the Star Wars, universe, so let me just tell a story I like in that setting, because then it's a Star Wars story. And I guess that's probably why they titled Solo that way. It was Solo, a Star Wars story. Because that's all these have been. A story set in Star Wars. Okay, quick edit here. I just saw the last episode of the Skeleton Crew and then the statements made by James Mangold about making a Star Wars show or movie that is away from the Star Wars lore, and I don't know that there are two better examples of why this whole concept of you're making a Star Wars story but not the Star Wars story, like, I don't think I could find better proof other than like making the First Order when that doesn't make sense in The Force Awakens. Like, I don't even know how many genres the last episode of Skeleton Crew went through, and it just didn't even seem like it was really just a love letter to enjoying Star Wars as a kid anymore. It seemed like a love letter to like every single movie that creator loved growing up, and it just didn't seem like it was in the Star Wars universe at all. Like, yeah, sure, there were X-Wings and a lightsaber, but other than that, was that really Star Wars at all? It started off as a cute show, but it just, what was that? Why was that made? And then for the James Mangold thing, that needs, honestly, a whole video to itself, because, yeah, you have to make something that fits within the franchise that you're making if you are making something within a franchise. Like, I'm sorry if he doesn't like that, but no one is forcing him to make a Star Wars movie. If he hates franchises, he needs to just not do franchise movies. That's an option. Thank you to anyone who has watched this far. This was just a little bit more of like a rant. I didn't really script anything out. If you would like to, please leave a comment. What are your thoughts? Did you notice this pattern? Do you agree, disagree? Let me know. Feel free to like, subscribe, whatever. And thank you very much.